Chapter 170, Good Conjurer, 3. Inside of a dark hall, a tall orc slowly walked forward. With each step he took, the ground beneath him would tremble slightly. Halting his steps in front of the entrance of the hall, Silic knelt down on one knee and proceeded to look down on the ground as his powerful voice resounded across the hall. "I, Silic, is here." As Silic's voice echoed across the surroundings, he was only met with silence. However, Silic didn't mind it as he remained kneeling on the ground. "Enter." Exactly 5 minutes after Silic made his presence known, a dark and raspy voice shook the whole building as a humongous pressure engulfed Silic's body completely. "KHRR, yes." Forcefully bearing the pressure and standing up, Silic sluggishly walked towards the hall before him. As he entered the hall, the first thing Silic saw were tremendous braziers hanging from 10 ivory columns by the side of the hall, lighting up every part of the hall, including the dark brown oaken floor that was covered by a black rug, comprised of the skin of some sort of beast. The rug ran from the throne down at the center of the hall all the way towards the entrance where Silic was walking. Rectangular banners with black and red sigils hung from the side of the walls, and between each banner sat a small altar full of candles, illuminating the statuettes of powerful creatures depicting either orcs or other fantastical creatures such as dragons and gargoyles. In the middle of the hall sat a magnificent throne made out of bones with 2 imposing statues depicting 2 large orcs holding onto their weapons. The throne was covered in sacred etchings, and fixed on each of the front legs was a red ruby that pulsated a red hue continuously like a heart. Sitting on top of the throne was a figure whose features were obscured by a large shadow cast by the 2 statues next to the throne. However, despite the fact that his features couldn't be seen, his majestic presence enveloped the whole hall, causing anyone that saw him to subconsciously feel inferior. Arriving a couple of meters before the obscure figure, taking a knee, Silic once again spoke. "Silic is here to report." Silence once again prevailed over the surroundings as the figure sitting on the throne observed Silic from his throne. "KHRR, KHRR." With each breath the figure took, the hall would shake slightly. Turning his head to the side, the figure coldly spoke. "Zornaraf." "Yes, father." Standing next to the throne was a rather young-looking orc. He was only half as tall as Silic and his muscles weren't as pronounced. However, a regal and majestic presence exuded from his body that was only slightly inferior to the orc sitting on the throne. Zornaraf. That was the name of the young orc standing next to the orc chief sitting on the throne. Birthed 16 years ago by the current chief of Good Conjurer, Zornaraf was exposed to the best resources and best education possible, making him the orc with the greatest potential. The young chief. That was what everyone in the city called him, as the elders and the chief unanimously decided on making him the next chief. Aside from the current chief, no other figure was as important as Zornaraf, who was the next chief in line. He was the last hope the orcs had at reclaiming the lost land of Amora. Presently, the reason why he was attending the meeting was because his father, the current chief, wanted for him to observe and understand what his job consisted of. He wanted him to learn from him, and Zornaraf naturally understood this. Pointing towards Silic kneeling down on the ground, the figure sitting on the throne, the current orc chief of Good Conjurer asked. "What do you think?" Turning his head towards his father, who was imposingly sitting on the throne, Zornaraf slowly said. "Father, Silic's sin is undeniable, he should be punished." Breathing out loud, the orc chief nodded his head as he asked. "KHRR, yes, Zornaraf, what do you think is the appropriate punishment for his failure?" Without hesitation, Zornaraf responded. "Death." "Are you sure?" Nodding his head resolutely, Zornaraf stared at Silic kneeling on the ground, whose face was expressionless. With a trace of disgust on his face, Zornaraf said. "Yes, we orcs don't need failures like him, why must we keep him?" Staring at Zornaraf for a couple of seconds, turning his attention back towards Silik, the orc chief's powerful voice resounded across the hall as he asked. Silik, do you have anything to say against Zornarafa's decision? Hearing his name being called, lifting his head up, and staring deeply into Zornaraf's eyes, Silik nodded his head. Yes. Hearing Silik's response, feeling challenged, Zornaraf raised his voice as he shouted at Silik. You dare! Raising his hand from the armrest of the throne, the orc chief glared at Zornaraf. Shut up! Only talk when it is your turn to talk, do not interrupt otherwise. As soon as his voice left his mouth, the whole room shook violently. Dreadful energy propagated outwards of the chief's body like a turbulent wave as it engulfed the entire hall. Realizing his mistake and lowering his head, Zornaraf nodded his head. Yes, father. As the next chief in line, you need to think long-term instead of short-term. As a leader, you must always be composed and mustn't let our primal instinct cloud or decision-making. Enlightened, Zornaraf nodded his head in understanding. Understood, father. Good. Seeing that Zornaraf had understood, turning his attention back to Silik, the orc chief's voice once again resounded across the hall. So, Silik, since you are so dissatisfied with my son's decision, tell me why we should keep you. Respectfully looking at the orc chief before him, Silik raised his voice as he said. I, Silik, 3rd Legion Commander of Good Kodra, have a lot to offer. Oh. Like what? You better sound convincing or I might just do what my son had proposed. Punching his chest once, Silik said. My strength, my loyalty, my blood, and my troops. Raising his brow, the orc chief snorted. Your troops? The ones that were just battling outside a moment ago? Hearing the orc's chief's statement, Silik's voice remained stoic as he continued. Yes, they are faithfully loyal to me. Killing me would have a detrimental effect on the morale of the troops, which you cannot afford to do at the moment. Killing me would also negatively affect the overall power of us orcs, as killing me would mean killing an important asset to the orcs. Pausing for a second, Silik loudly said. Killing me would result in your position to shake. Gripping onto the armrest of his throne, the orc chief squinted his eyes. Oh. Are you threatening me? Be it humans, elves, demons, or dwarfs, power struggles were normal. It would have been strange if the current orc chief had no other people vying for his position. Silik's point was quite a valid one, as his death would mean that the current chief would have his power considerably weakened, as not only will he lose a powerful commander, he would also a lot of the soldiers that are loyal to Silik. Normally the current orc chief would have taken notice of the small threat as his position was solidified, however, glancing at Zornaraf next to him, he had to make his decision carefully. Though his position was solidified, Zornaraf's position still wasn't. If he lost Silik's support, then his ascension as next chief would become much harder. Simply put, this would do more harm than good for Zornaraf, as it would allow for rivals to gain valuable time to grow. This could not happen, and Silik knew this. Noticing the orc chief falling into deep contemplation, shaking his head, Silik raised his head and stared at the orc chief straight into his eyes as he coldly said. No, I am not threatening you, I just know my worth. Silence soon prevailed over the surroundings. Deeply staring at Silik's eyes for a couple of seconds, the orc chief tapped on the armrest of his throne for a couple of seconds before opening his mouth. KHRRR, KHRRR, very well. Nodding his head, the orc chief looked at Zornaraf as he mumbled. You still have a long way to go, Zornaraf. Turning his attention back towards Silik, the orc's chief's powerful voice shook the whole hall as he spoke out loud. From henceforth, Silik, 3rd Legion Commander of Good Kodra, will be dismissed from his duties and will guard the food storage for the next 3 years. Until then, he will no longer have anything to do with the 3rd Legion and will only be responsible for safeguarding the main food supply. Deeply staring at Silik as he released his pressure, the orc chief said. Do you have any problems? With an incomparably dark face, Silic stood up and shook his head. KHHRRR, no, I will comply. Turning around, Silic soon left the hall. As he turned around, his face became especially terrifying. If looks could kill, then right now Silic could slaughter a whole army. Although his punishment was on the lighter side, Silic knew that it was merely a mask. By separating him and his troops for 3 years, the orc chief was trying to diminish the loyalty they had towards him so that in the future he would have been able to pull off the same stunt. As his thoughts paused there, Silic clenched his teeth tightly as he walked out of the building. Don't think that I'll let your plan succeed that easily. Not so far from where Silic was, in a rather secluded spot in Good Kodra, with Kevin still glaring daggers at me, I leisurely sat down on the ground and took off the bulky armor.
Ha!
This was hella stuffy. As I threw the armor to the side, I couldn't help but take a big breath of fresh air as I rejoiced at the fact that I no longer needed to wear the armor. It felt as though I was staying inside of a sauna. Are you seriously not going to address the fact that you literally pushed me towards the orcs and abandoned me? Staring at me from above, Kevin's mouth twitched. That? Yes. Turning my attention back to Kevin, I dully said. Well, we did manage to get out, didn't we? Moreover, you're not hurt either, right? No bu dash. Enough of that, we've got more important things to talk about. Cutting Kevin off before he could finish speaking, I diverted the conversation. No use crying over spilled milk. Helpless, Kevin nodded his head as he asked. So, what are you planning on doing? What am I planning on doing? Taking off the metal pads from my arms, a faint smile appeared on my lips. Channeling flame scions towards the tip of my fingers, I proceeded to snap my fingers. As soon as I snapped my fingers, a small red flame appeared on my hand. Deeply staring at the flame in my hand, I said. We're going to ignite the flame that will rage upon Amora and leave nothing but devastation in its wake. Pausing for a second as the smile on my face deepened, glancing towards Kevin for a couple of seconds, I clenched my fist and said. We're going to start a war. Chapter 171, Igniting the Flames, 1. Opening his eyes wide, Kevin exclaimed in disbelief. You're planning on starting a war? Putting my finger on my lips as I gestured for Kevin to quiet down, I shook my head. No, don't misunderstand. The war was always going to happen regardless of past, present, and future. All I'm doing is just pushing up the date of when the war will happen. Frowning, after a bit of thought, Kevin nodded his head. I guess you're right. Judging from what he saw the past few days, it did indeed seem like a war was inevitable. From the way that the orcs desperately sought food every day in order to survive, to how they were forced to live in a completely desolate place. A war was indeed inevitable.
Yeah.
Staring at Kevin, who seemed to have bought what I said, I secretly shook my head. Naive. Actually, what I said was total bullsh*t. The war that seemed to be fast approaching will never happen. In the novel, a couple of years from now, by the time Kevin arrived in Amora, the war that was supposed to happen never happened. In fact, when he arrived, the situation in Amora was vastly different compared to now, as the orcs conquered back 40% of the land in Amora. The reason for how the orcs were able to reclaim the land was mostly due to the fact that the demons were forced to send some of their forces away due to a certain event happening in the near future, which could more or less be linked to Kevin being the source. That aside, the war that seemed to be looming over this world was never going to happen. But Kevin didn't need to know this fact. Had he known that we were going to start a war that was never going to happen, Kevin would have probably never have agreed to my plans. I guess it was just against his morals as someone who had a hero complex, but I honestly didn't care. To me, aside from the people close to me, nothing else mattered. If I had to start a war in order to achieve my goals, then so be it. I'll make it happen. Especially since my goal was to infiltrate S29, the city that once used to be the capital of Amora, and was now under the demon's rule. Going to S29 was a must, as everything that I wanted was there. Be it Mindbreaker Curse Cure, the Flute of Artemis, Angelica's item, and a few other things I wanted, everything was located there. By starting a war, I was essentially trying to divert the demon's attention away from that city so that I could sneak in and take everything that I wanted when the stronger demons were out fighting. And once I took everything, I didn't need to look for ways to escape, as I would have Kevin directly create a portal back to Earth in order to escape. Knowing this, I knew that all I needed to do was sneak into the city. With me not needing to think about an escape plan, it meant that I could now fully focus on igniting the flames of war. Turning my attention back to Kevin, I started explaining to him the current plan. Listen up, Kevin, as you probably already know, in order for me to achieve my goal, I need to start a war. And the thing you're about to do next is extremely important. Nodding his head, Kevin's face turned serious as he perked up his ears. Okay. Pausing and staring at Kevin straight into his eyes, I softly said. Your goal is simple: destroy their food storage. This point was self-explanatory. With the orcs no longer having food storage, they will be forced to venture outside of the city to look for food, and the only way they could do so at the moment would be through plundering and attacking the demon cities in the northern hemisphere of the world. This would obviously enrage the demons and create more conflicts between them. But hold on, would this really be enough to start an all-out war with the demons? The answer was no. Just destroying their food storage wasn't enough. Although this would definitely escalate the conflict between the two parties, this was not the trigger that would start the war. Destroying the food supply was merely like moving a pawn. It just moved the game forward, it didn't end the game. What would really start the war was up to me. Fortunately, I had already thought of this before coming here, as all my preparations were ready. Glancing at the black ring on my finger, a faint smile appeared on my lips. You're soon going to come into play. Where is their food storage? As I was looking at the black ring on my finger, snapping me out of my thoughts was Kevin's voice as he asked about the location of the food storage. Listening to Kevin's question, my mind stopped working for a second as I responded. No idea. Frowning, Kevin was taken aback as he asked. Then how are we supposed to do this? What was the point of destroying the food storage if they had no idea of where it was? Moreover, considering how important it was definitely hidden somewhere within the city. It's not like they were going to make its location known, as that would basically be revealing their weakness for everyone to see. Although the orcs were stupid, they weren't that stupid. Looking at the city and seeing how big it was, Kevin estimated it would take a long time for the both of them to even get a clue on where food storage was. Moreover, since they only had 1 month here, wasting time looking for the food supply wasn't the most ideal thing. Understanding Kevin's worries, I reassured him. Don't worry, although I may not know where the food storage is, I know someone who does. Taken aback, Kevin asked. Who? Smiling mysteriously, I looked towards the large circular pyramid-like structure in the distance. You've already met him. Thinking for a moment and finally realizing something, opening his eyes wide, Kevin said. Wait, you don't mean? Nodding my head, I confirmed Kevin's assumption.
Yeah.
Our very own Commander Silic. Pausing for a second as I admired the black tower at the center of the city, I slowly continued. It's just my guess, but because of the fiasco with the food supply thing, he is probably going to get demoted. And considering how influential he is in the army, as we had just seen a while back, the orc chief will most probably not allow him to enter the army again to try to decrease his influence in it. Meaning that there is only one option left. Interrupting me, Kevin said. Guarding the food supply. Staring at Kevin and seeing that he had understood, I nodded my head. Yes, considering his strength and status. If he's not going to be part of the army, the most logical thing would be for him to guard the food supply. Any other role and it would be a waste of his talent. Pausing for a second, I looked at Kevin and continued. So, if you follow him discreetly, you will know the location of the food supply. Placing his hand on his chin as he closed his eyes and thought for a moment, after a couple of seconds Kevin proceeded to nod his head. That makes sense. Moreover, spying on him shouldn't be too hard considering the fact that the orcs here aren't well versed in detecting mana.
Yeah.
Hearing Kevin's comment, I nodded my head. Fortunately, he was smart enough to understand my train of thought. Because Kevin and I were human, it was much easier for us to sneak around in good culture. The reason was because orcs here had zero self-awareness towards humans, more specifically mana. That was because mana and humans weren't a thing that was supposed to exist in Amora. A planet only inhabited by orcs and demons. Naturally, because humans weren't supposed to exist here, it came as no surprise as to why the orcs couldn't detect mana fluctuations that come from humans. They just simply weren't aware of it, and even if they were aware of it, they would have been wary of it as humans weren't supposed to exist on this planet. In short, this made it a lot easier for Kevin and I to sneak around the city without getting caught. Still, just because it was harder for them to detect us, it didn't mean that they couldn't. If we came too close to them, we could easily be detected by the sound of our breathing and heartbeat. With orcs mainly focusing on their body, their senses were far more evolved than ours. It wouldn't be strange for them to detect us just through our sense of smell. But that was fine. If we stood far enough, we would easily be able to spy on the orcs. Moreover, as I've said before, Kevin and I were human. Our smell wasn't something that the orcs could understand, not unless they saw humans firsthand, which they shouldn't have. So, although possible, the chances of them sensing us through smell wasn't very high. This was proven on our way towards the city with the orc army. All right. The more he thought about it, the more Kevin was convinced with the plan. He shared a similar thought process and instantly understood the crux of the plan. It could definitely work. Glancing at me, he asked, "I can do that, but what will you do?" Pointing towards myself, I asked, "Me?
Yeah.
Are you coming with me?" Shaking my head, I immediately refused. "No, I won't." "Then what will you be doing?" "Well, you'll know soon enough. If I told him now, it'll ruin the whole surprise. My plan needed Angelica, therefore I couldn't disclose too much or things might become complicated. After all, the two had already met. Just thinking of the conversation we would have once he found out about Angelica gave me headaches. Let's not have the two meet. That aside, now that I explained everything to Kevin, it was about time to enact the plan. Glancing at Kevin, I said, "Let's split up for now. Come back to me in 2 days' time once you find something out." Staring at me in the eyes, Kevin proceeded to nod his head as he turned around and headed towards the center of Good Kodra. "All right, I'll meet you once I find something." Swoosh! Watching Kevin's figure leaving in the distance, my eyes drifted towards the large tower in the middle of the city. Soon the corner of my lips curled upwards as I softly mumbled, "I'm genuinely curious as to how an all-out war between orcs and demons looks like." Shrugging my shoulder as I turned around, I knew that I wouldn't need to wait for long to get my answer. Chapter 172, Igniting the Flames, 2. I think I've got it. Standing on top of a tall flat house, with binoculars in his hands, Kevin stared towards the distance. Towards a rather inconspicuous house that looked like any other one present in the city. As he looked at the house in the distance, Kevin tried his best to hide his presence. Although he was far from it, it was never wrong to be extra cautious. The reason why he was being especially cautious was because he had finally found where the food supply was located. Squinting his eyes as he looked through the binoculars in his hands, slightly lowering his head, Kevin whispered towards his watch. "I've found the food storage." Just like Ren had told him 2 days ago, Silic was indeed demoted and made to guard the food storage supply. Thus, following Silic from the distance, Kevin was quickly able to find the location of the food storage, and from there, he spent the last few days observing. From Silic's behavioral pattern to the time he spent guarding the storage space, as well as how long his break took and who replaced him when taking breaks. He knew everything. As his thoughts paused there, thinking of Silic, Kevin he couldn't help but be impressed by Ren's analytical skills. Just from a couple of clues, he was able to figure out Silic's demotion. And from there, basically, deduce the location of the hidden food supply that was supposed to be unknown by almost everyone. It was honestly really impressive, and Kevin knew that compared to Ren, he was far inferior to him in that aspect. After a short pause, snapping Kevin out of his thoughts, Ren's voice echoed from the speaker of the watch. "Oh. Where exactly is the food storage?" "Southern area." "Southern area?" "I see." Still staring at the house in the distance with the binoculars in between his hands, Kevin asked. "When should I proceed?" After a short pause, Ren's voice once again echoed from the speaker of the watch. "You can do so now, maybe? I'm pretty much done on my side as well, or do you need more time? We must act together or this might not work." "Yes, my preparations are almost ready." Pausing for a second, Kevin carefully asked to make sure he understood what he had to do. "You only need for me to destroy the food storage, right? Not sneak in and take in something?" "No, just destroy the food storage." Nodding his head, Kevin responded. "All right, I'll start operating in 2 hours, I'll give you a heads up when I do." 2 hours. Staring at the building in the distance, Kevin decided to act after 2 more hours passed. The reason for this was because that was the time he estimated Silic would take a break. Having seen Silic's strength firsthand, Kevin knew it was best to operate once he was gone, as he was simply too powerful. Once Silic was out, Kevin had about 15 to 30 minutes to operate. Any more than that and he would risk having Silic discover him, which he couldn't afford to do. Especially since Ren specifically told him that he couldn't be seen, as that would pretty much ruin all of the plans. Although Kevin didn't know what he meant by that, he knew that he had to complete this mission without leaving a trace of himself behind. Taking note of when Kevin was going to take action, Ren's voice once again echoed through the speakers of the watch. "Great, 2 hours sounds good, good luck." "All right, I'll message you soon." Tack. Turning off his watch, Kevin slowly closed his eyes and took out a small black drone from his dimensional space. Thereafter, putting the binoculars down, Kevin activated his skill F, Mind Cleansing, as he threw the drone in the air. Whoa! Shortly after the drone left his hand, it disappeared into the distance. Staring at the area where the drone used to be, Kevin softly muttered. "It's about time I moved." On the northern side of Good Kodra, quietly resting on the rooftop of a building, I looked towards a certain building in the distance. With black being the most prominent color, a rather unique-looking infrastructure appeared in my vision. From the outside, the house looked grandiose and intimidating. Using dark oak wood to build the frame of the house, sharp bone tusks protruded from the side of the house as large red banners fluttered in the air, further adding to the intimidating feeling. Hoo! Staring at the building before me, I took a deep breath. The building I was currently looking at was the place where the young chief, Zornaraf, lived. And probably the last place he'll live in. That's right, the next part of my plan consisted in the assassination of Zornaraf, the next orc chief. Only by assassinating him will everything go as I envisioned. After they realized that their young chief had died, the orcs would naturally not stand still. Perhaps the orc chief may be able to still remain rational after his son's death, as he couldn't wage war with the demons because of his personal feelings. However, that was only if his son's death was the only thing that happened. Unfortunately for them, Zornarafa's death wasn't the only thing that will happen today. Staring towards the southern side of Good Kodra, a faint smile appeared on my lips as I softly muttered. I'll leave it up to you, Kevin. With Kevin taking care of the supply storage and me assassinating Zornaraf at the same time, all the pieces that I had set in motion would slowly come together for the one play that I was looking for, an all-out war between the orcs and the demons. As my thoughts paused there, staring at the ring in my hand, I softly said, "Are you ready, Angelica?" "Yes." "You know what you have to do, right?" After a short pause, Angelica responded. "Kill the young orc using my powers." Nodding my head, I reminded.
Yeah.
"Make sure you expose yourself once you are going for the kill. Only once they know that it was a demon that killed Zornaraf would everything start to make sense. And in order to do that, what better way than have a demon actually kill him?" After a brief second of silence, Angelica asked, "Does killing him mean that I've held my end of the deal?" Shaking my head, I responded. 80% there, I'll need you for one more thing after that." She still had one more role to play. After that, she would pretty much no longer be of use to me, but that was fine. After all, once she finished with her parts, Amora would be engulfed by the raging flames of war. And for that to happen I needed for Zornaraf to die. Hearing my response, Angelica agreed. All right. As long as she could reach Viscount rank, Angelica didn't mind killing an orc or even demons. What mattered to her the most at the moment was her strength, anything else was secondary. Good. Seeing Angelica agree, the smile on my face deepened. Naturally, killing Zornaraf was the main reason why I had brought Angelica with me. With her killing Zornaraf through her demonic power, everything would be traced towards the demons. And although orcs couldn't detect mana, if I were the person responsible for killing Zornaraf, chances of them pinning the blame on the demons was low. They may assume that it was another orc who did it out of spite or in order to become the next chief. The reason why they wouldn't like it to the demons was because when demons killed, they often left a distinct residual demonic energy in the air. Almost like a signature, making it easier to understand that they were indeed the ones who were responsible for the incident. If I were the one to kill Zornaraf, then the orcs might have trouble connecting this to the demons specifically because I couldn't leave any demonic energy. As I was in the middle of my thoughts, I suddenly sensed something in the distance. Soon a smile appeared on my face as I said,
Oh.
"He's coming, get ready, Angelica, we're about to move." Walking towards the house that I was observing from the building I was on, I saw the figure of a young orc accompanied by another orc slowly making their way towards the house. Zornaraf and his bodyguard. After having observed Zornarafa's behavioral pattern as well as routines for the past 2 days, I pretty much got the gist of the situation. And I had to say, I was rather disappointed. This was mostly due to the fact that Zornaraf only had one bodyguard with him at all times. One.
Yeah.
Just one bodyguard. The fact that Zornaraf, the next orc chief, only had one bodyguard with him was rather shocking. Was he that confident of the fact that no one would target him? Although his strength ranged around rank, which was amazing for someone his age, in the grand spectrum of things, he was amongst the weakest individuals residing in the city. Regarding his guard, from what I've observed, I'd estimate his strength to be around C+ to B rank. Which was honestly really low. Not benefiting the status of the person he was protecting, the next chief. To make matters worse, the bodyguard didn't actually even enter Zornarafa's house as he waited outside. It was as though Zornaraf didn't care at all about people assassinating him. Was he that confident in his strength and background? Thinking thus far, I shook my head. He was still a newborn chick after all. Prideful and arrogant. The two recipes for disaster. Though it sounded like a rant on my side, I was genuinely quite happy with this development as it made my life easier. I had originally made a lot of preparations for this, only to be left speechless by how uncautious they were. Hoo. Looking at the ring on my finger for a couple of seconds, I exhaled. I guess it's time for me to make a move. Ding. Feeling a slight vibration on my wrist, staring at my watch, I knew that it was time for me to move. Seems like Kevin feels the same way. This was the most crucial step to my plans. I couldn't afford to mess up. Zornarafa's death was the first and most important piece of my plan. Once he died, everything would start falling into place. Closing my eyes, a white hue shrouded my body for a split second before it slowly disappeared as if nothing had ever happened. Standing still for a couple of seconds, as I opened my eyes, the world around me gradually lost its color. My heart rate decreased, and all the distracting thoughts inside of my mind disappeared as only one goal imprinted itself inside of my mind. Ensuring Zornarafa's death. Taking a step forward, I softly mumbled. Monarch's Indifference. Chapter 173, Igniting the Flames, 3. 2 hours since last contacting Ren, putting away the binoculars in his hand, Kevin jumped off the building he was on. The time was right. Tap. As his feet softly landed on the ground, Kevin quickly turned around and swiftly moved through the narrow streets of the Good Kodrer. Fortunately for Kevin, as he was no longer the size of an orc and thus no longer wearing the heavy armor that weighed like a truck, he was now able to move around the city fast and stealthily. This should be the place. Stopping in front of an inconspicuous-looking house, glancing at his watch, Kevin softly mumbled. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That's how much time Kevin had at his disposal. After he noticed that Silik was taking a break, Kevin immediately sprung into action as he quickly arrived before the place where he observed the food storage was located. 2 orcs. Glancing left and right, Kevin spotted 2 orcs walking around the perimeter of the house. Although they looked nothing special as they wore no armor nor did they seem strong, Kevin wasn't fooled. Using his drone to scout the perimeter, Kevin had a general idea of the location of every guard in the vicinity, including Silik, who had gone to a nearby tavern to eat. Regarding Silik, from what he had collected these past few days, Silik's breaks were all around 15 to 20 minutes long as he would quickly come back to his post. Although he hated his job, he was a diligent orc. Still, if there was one thing Kevin managed to observe was that whenever he had a break he had to inform the other guards of his absence. Because of this rule, Kevin was quickly able to figure out who the other guards were. And thus why he knew that the 2 orcs before him were guards. Although Kevin was most wary of Silik, the strength of the 2 orcs before him wasn't something to scoff at. From what he observed, in terms of strength, they were all within the rank range, which was something that the present Kevin couldn't handle. Regardless of the fact that he had a system, there was no way he could fight the orcs with his current strength. But that was fine, since his goal was to destroy the warehouse. Kevin didn't need to be close to them nor did he have to fight them. Staring up towards the dark gray sky covered in clouds, Kevin softly mumbled. It's about time it rained. Not long after the words escaped from his mouth, a droplet of water fell towards the ground. Following the first droplet soon came another, and from there more and more droplets of water came crashing towards the ground. Extending his hand and feeling the rain falling down from the sky, from his dimensional space, Kevin took out a black cylindrical object that had a red button on the top. Pressing the red button, Kevin glanced at his watch and remained still. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. All right. Fwa. Exactly 5 minutes after he pressed the button, Kevin took out a black square-shaped device that looked like a small vehicle from his dimensional space and threw it on the ground. Glancing at his watch, Kevin tapped on the screen and the vehicle-like device before him moved forward a couple of meters. It's working, good. Seeing that the device worked, Kevin nodded his head in satisfaction. The device he was currently using was one of the newest ground drones available on the market back on Earth. Equipped with the most up-to-date cloaking function and sound dampening system, the product was something that could easily infiltrate secured locations without getting noticed. Although it wouldn't work on the truly powerful people, it could more or less evade the perception of most people, unless they were actively seeking the device, and that would be a different story. If they were unaware of its presence, most people wouldn't be able to detect it. Which was enough. Thankfully, before coming to Amora, Kevin had brought the equipment with him. Since he loved using these kinds of devices and gadgets as they made his life easier, Kevin naturally brought the devices with him. Although he liked to fight with his sword if he was presented with another easier option that didn't involve him risking his life, Kevin would much rather take that option. He was no battle junkie after all. Licking his lips and controlling the drone through his watch, the device quickly moved towards where the guards were standing. As the drone moved, the rain became even more aggressive, masking the already little sound the drone made. As he watched the drone move forward, staring towards the sky, Kevin softly mumbled, "I guess the effects of the sleeping ivy are starting to work." Although the drone he was using had very good cloaking and dampening devices, it wasn't completely foolproof. Had the guards been in the right state of mind, they would have instantly noticed the small trail that the drone left behind as it moved across the puddles of water on the ground. But that only applied if they were in their right state of mind. However, they weren't. And that was because currently, another factor was at play. Sleeping ivy. That was the name of the poison Kevin had put on the air drone that was levitating up in the air. Using the rain as a way to camouflage the poison, Kevin released the poison in the air through his drone. Originally he had planned on directly feeding the poison to the orcs through the food they ate at the tavern they frequented. However, after noticing the erratic climate, Kevin opted to directly spread the poison through the rain. The poison was rather weak and a non-lethal one, however, it was because of how mild the poison was that Kevin chose it. With the poison being extremely weak, once it entered their system, the orcs would have no idea they were poisoned. Normally, orcs would have been able to tell whether a poison had entered their system thanks to their strong constitution, however, that only applied to strong poisons. If they found themselves poisoned by a weak poison, their bodies wouldn't react to it, and thus they were unable to know that they had been poisoned, which was exactly what Kevin was aiming for, as the poison he gave them was a poison that caused their senses to slightly decrease for a short period of time. The reason he chose this poison was self-explanatory. He wanted to increase the chances of his ground vehicle making it past them. Kevin didn't want to make any mistakes. As long as he could reduce the chances of his plan failing, he would take it. It was never wrong to be cautious. And the result paid off. Not long after the poison fell on the orcs' faces, they suddenly seemed to be more lethargic. Although their backs were straight, their eyes weren't as clear and lucid as they were before, making Kevin understand that they had been successfully poisoned. Therefore, not long after the drone moved, Kevin slowly drove it past the orcs, right towards the door that led to the warehouse. Tensely staring at the camera view from his watch, Kevin tapped on the screen of his watch. Initiate drop. As soon as Kevin tapped on the screen, the vehicle stopped moving. Shortly after, a small compartment of the drone opened up, revealing multiple thumb-sized devices, each about the size of a spider. Not long after the doors of the compartment opened up, the spider-like devices lit up with a red in the middle. Shortly after, the spider-like devices quickly got moved away from the large vehicle and entered the door leading to the food warehouse through the narrow gap at the bottom. Good. The plan was almost completed. Staring at the spider-like devices entering the door from the distance, Kevin felt a slight ping in his heart as he recalled the fact that each of them was worth around 10,000 U. The reason why he was looking at them like that was that they were all going to explode soon. Yes, they were all loaded with explosives. Although their power was weaker than that of a regular grenade, when piled up together, they would without a doubt be able to create a massive explosion. especially since there were over 100 of them. Knowing this, Kevin knew that once they exploded his money would also go along with the explosion, but in the end, he could only grit his teeth and endure it as the 5-star sword manual was worth far more than that. In fact, comparing the value of the two was like comparing a Ferrari to a Fiat. Huge difference. All right, everything is set. Shortly after all of the small drones entered the house through the narrow gap of the door, using his watch, Kevin quietly recalled the main drone back. 3 minutes. Staring at the time of his watch, Kevin knew he was running low on time. In 3 minutes he estimated that Silik would arrive. Increasing the speed of the ground vehicle, as soon as it arrived before Kevin, he quickly picked it up and ran as far away as possible from the warehouse. He couldn't allow himself to be too close to Silik as he might actually be able to detect something. Hoo! After stealthily running away in the distance, making sure that he was far enough, Kevin sighed in relief. This should be far enough. With a solemn look on his face, Kevin stared at the warehouse in the distance. After a couple of seconds, bringing his watch next to his mouth, Kevin tapped on the screen and softly mumbled. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. On the opposite side of where Kevin was, coldly glancing at the orc that stood in front of the Zornarafa's house, Ren hid himself a couple of blocks away from him. Right now he just stood still and observed the house before him. He was waiting for something. Ding! 10, 9, 8. Suddenly, Ren felt his watch vibrate and Kevin's voice entered his ears. Hearing the countdown, placing his hand on the sheath of his new sword, Bleak Star, Ren channeled his wind and fire scion simultaneously as blue streaks of light started appearing on guard of the sword. Kraka! Kraka! 7, 6, 5. With each passing second, the electricity revolving around the sheet of the sword became more and more glaring as the low muffled sound of thunder rumbling became more and more discernible. 4, 3. Glancing at his watch indifferently, Ren remained still. 2, 1, 0. Then the countdown hit 0. Once it did, silence prevailed over the surroundings. However, the silence only lasted for a split second as an enormous explosion soon resounded in the distance. Good Kodra shook. Chapter 174, Igniting the Flames, 4. Boom! What's going on? Feeling the tremendous explosion in the distance, the orc guarding Zornaraf house looked towards the direction where the explosion originated from. Because of the heavy rain, it was hard to discern what had happened. Glancing left and right, the orc suddenly took a step forward to get a better look at what had happened. Huh? Who are you? Step. Step. However, before he could find out what had happened, an obscure figure appeared a couple of meters from where he was standing. In a slow and steady manner. Repeating once again, the orc shouted. I said, who are you? He was once again met with total silence. Feeling that something was wrong, raising his weapon, a large double-edged axe, in the air, the orc once again shouted as his voice shook the nearby surroundings and a powerful pressure exuded from his body. I've warned you already, state your name. Kraka. Kraka. Stopping 10 meters away from the orc, the figure took a stance as blue streaks of light appeared on the tip of his sword. Huh? E rank? As he stared at the figure before him, the orc was taken aback. That was because he was able to sense the person's strength. And what he found out shocked him, but not in a negative way. He found out that the figure before him was only E-rank. Something that was almost on the level of cannon fodder in this world, especially for him since he was already a C+, borderline B. To him E was like swatting a fly. How could someone as weak as him actually think he could harm him? You think you can harm me with that pitiful amount of strength? Lifting his double-edged axe and pointing it towards Ren, the orc glared at him, who remained still throughout the whole time as he gathered energy towards his sword. Annoyed by the fact that he was once again being ignored, the orc decided to make a move. "Since you won't talk, I'll make you talk, boom." Tensing his muscles, the ground beneath the orc cracked as his body propelled forwards towards Ren's direction. In a swinging motion, the orc swung the heavy axe towards where Ren was standing. "Die." Apathetically staring at the orc that was approaching him at extreme speeds, raising his left hand, Ren suddenly snapped his finger. Snap! KHH, who? As soon as Ren's finger snapped, the orc suddenly found his body abruptly halting for a split second. Following that, the world around him became dyed in white and the figure he was looking at disappeared. A subtle clicking sound followed his disappearance. Click! The third movement of the Keiki style, void step appearing on the opposite side of the orc, was Ren's cold figure. Behind him, a blue trail of light appeared as the muffled sound of thunderbolts continuously resounded across the area. Cracka! Cracka! Spurt! A couple of seconds after the exchange, an arm suddenly flew in the distance as blood spilled everywhere. Thud! At the same time the arm flew in the air, taking a knee, the orc supported his body with his axe. KHHH, how could someone as weak as you harm me? He, a less than C+ rank orc, actually got injured from someone that had just entered E rank? Humiliating. If the others found out what had happened, he would become the laughing stock of the city. Thinking along those lines, his deep voice resounded across the area as he shouted. Unacceptable. He couldn't allow such a situation to happen. He must kill the weakling that was before him in order to wash the shame away. Hoo! Unaware of the orc's thoughts, exhaling as turbid air escaped from his mouth, feeling a slight stinging sensation on the left side of his body, Ren's cold eyes looked towards where the pain was coming from, and he soon noticed his left hand missing. No anger, pain, resentment, or any emotions were displayed on his face as he looked at the left side of his body, which was bleeding profoundly. Ignoring the missing arm and turning his attention back towards the orc in the distance, Ren softly mumbled. Pity, this was the first time he couldn't one-shot his opponent. Although the orc before him had a small hole on the right side of his body and was somewhat injured, he had still not killed his opponent in one shot. In order to kill the orc, Ren had made ample preparations with the twin gargoyle artifact and his strongest move, the third movement of the Keiki. This was supposed to be his strongest combo, and yet his opponent was still not dead. He had failed. But this was within Ren's estimation. His opponent was an orc and was around 2 ranks higher than him. Their skin and defense were far stronger than that of a human. Had his opponent been a human, they might have died in one move. However, sadly his opponent wasn't, as they specialized in defense and raw power. Fortunately, although he hadn't killed him in one shot, he had still injured him. This was enough for Ren. You. Clenching the right part of his chest, the orc glared towards Ren's direction as his deep voice echoed across the surroundings. Shortly after, as the features of his aggressor became more discernible, the orc was taken aback as his deep voice resounded across the space. Human? A human? What is a human doing here? As he looked at the feature of the individual that had attacked him, the orc was able to identify the fact that it was a human. Although he had never seen a human before, he was aware of their existence. Therefore he was able to quickly identify the fact that his aggressor was human due to the fact that they weren't short and had no pointy ears. Staring at Ren's figure in the distance whose arm was missing, the orc slowly stood up. I thought humans were smart, but it looks like you're stupid. I can tell that you're weak. How dare the likes of you try to kill me with that pitiful amount of strength? Pausing for a second, lifting his axe in the air, and putting it on his shoulder, the orc continued. I don't understand why you would try to fight me. but soon reinforcement will come, and if you're not dead by the time I am finished with you, you will die by the hands of the others." Coldly staring at the orc before him, Ren slowly said, "You talk too much, but your thoughts are unnecessary. The perimeter around us is sealed, no one saw nor heard anything. Having set up the dimensional space around them beforehand, no one knew of what happened here." Although dimensional spaces weren't hard to discover, now that everyone's attention was towards the explosion in the distance, Ren knew that he didn't have to worry about people discovering what had happened. At least not for a short period of time. Glancing around and noticing a transparent membrane covering the area he was in, the orc glared at Ren as he shouted, "You think it matters? With your strength, what does that pitiful trick of yours matter?" Picking up his weapon, the double-edged axe, the orc was about to once again attack Ren. Spurt! However, before he was about to move, to his horror, he suddenly found himself unable to move his body. What? Weakly looking down on his body, the orc soon found a hand piercing through his chest as green blood splattered on the ground. Using the last remaining energy he could muster, turning his head to the side to see who was responsible for killing him, the orc soon saw two eyes coldly looking at him. "Demon?" Those were the last words that escaped from his mouth as he found himself slowly losing consciousness. Thud. 1530. Staring at the orc that had just died, Angelica had a complicated expression on her face as she looked at Ren in the distance. "Did you really have to sacrifice your arm to kill him?" Staring at the pool of blood that was leaking from where his left hand was supposed to be, Ren watched as the rain carried his blood away, removing all evidence of his presence. Glancing at Angelica, Ren indifferently said, "Yes, this was the fastest and quietest scenario that I had envisioned. Any other plan would have taken too long." Hearing Ren's response, Angelica only had one word in her mind. Ruthless. In Angelica's eyes, the current Ren was absolutely ruthless. In order to have her appear behind the orc to sneak attack him, Ren had purposefully sacrificed his arm. The one that had her in her ring form. Taking advantage of the moment when the orc was busy looking at Ren, Angelica turned into her original form and snuck up from behind him. With him unaware of her existence, she stealthily killed him without causing too much of a commotion. Fast and swiftly. This was the first time Angelica had killed someone whose rank matched her so swiftly and quietly. Ren's plan was indeed the fastest and most efficient plan, however, it came at a cost of an arm. "What about your arm?" Hearing Angelica's question, staring at his severed arm in the distance, Ren indifferently said, "I can reattach it." Frowning, Angelica nodded her head. She understood this part as there were methods out there that could help regrow limbs, but what really baffled her was the fact that Ren was showing no signs of pain despite the fact that his arm was missing. "Okay, plank." Turning around, sensing something, Ren looked towards the door of the house opposite to him, which shortly after abruptly opened, revealing the features of a young orc. "Ordis, what happened?" Opening the door of his house, Zornaraf called out for his bodyguard. However, he was soon left speechless by the sight before him. First, a massive explosion resounded across the distance, shortly after he suddenly heard noises coming from outside the house. Not even a minute after he heard the noises, as he went out to check out what had happened, he found his bodyguard dead, coldly lying on the floor. Standing on top of its corpse was a slim, pale figure with deep blue eyes whose arm was missing. Next to him, a beautiful woman with two horns on her head appeared. "What's going on?" Coldly staring at Zornaraf, who was in a daze, Ren glanced at Angelica and indifferently said, "Angelica, it's your turn." "Yes, Fwawa." Suddenly appearing before Zornaraf, Angelica's enchanting figure coldly looked at him. A majestic red hue shrouded her body as Zornaraf suddenly found himself unable to move. Finally realizing that Angelica was a demon, Zornaraf shouted incredulously, "What? A demon?" Ignoring Zornaraf, turning around and looking at Ren, Angelica asked. Him? Apathetically looking between Zornaraf and Angelica, Ren nodded his head. Yes, kill him. With Angelica having regained most of her powers back, Zornaraf was as good as dead. Especially since she was a rank higher than him. Even if he was a genius, without preparations, bridging the gap in rank was something that couldn't be done. Not even Ren could do it. Unless he had planned a lot beforehand, Ren couldn't defeat someone whose rank was higher than his. Just wasn't possible. Turning around as he walked towards the direction of where his hand was located, Ren coldly said. Kill him. Pausing for a second, picking up his arm from the ground, Ren took out a green potion from his pocket. Uncapping the lid of the potion, Ren placed the arm back towards where it was supposed to be and downed the potion. Once again staring at Angelica, Ren indifferently said. Kill him and let the world know of your existence and your presence. Kill him and let Amora be engulfed in the flames of war. Yes, nodding her head, turning her attention back towards Zornaraf who was paralyzed on the spot due to her skill, Angelica raised her hand and channeled her demonic powers. Schwa! Soon the surroundings shook as a reddish-black hue emanated from Angelica's body. Who are you? KHHH. Reaching her hand forward and grabbing Zornaraf by the face, Angelica channeled her powers, and soon, to Zornaraf's horror, he found his body rapidly shrinking as his energy was quickly getting sapped away from his body. Struggling with all his might, Zornaraf shouted.
No.
Release me. Do you not know who I am? I am the next CH-. Shut up and die. Increasing the intensity of her absorption, Zornaraf soon found himself unable to speak as his resistance decreased with each passing second. Soon his body shrunk completely as he started looking more and more like a mummy. Not long after, taking one last breath, Zornaraf died. KHHH. Throughout the whole time, he couldn't even put up a fight. Thud. Throwing Zornaraf's body away, Angelica knew. She knew that today marked the beginning of the end. On this day, the flames of war shall envelop Amora, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. And this was all due to one man. Ren Dover. Chapter 175, The Vigil of the War of Amora 1. It's been about 10 days since Kevin destroyed the food warehouse and I killed Zornaraf. And a lot happened since then. Staring towards the distance, thousands upon thousands of orcs all equipped with heavy armor and weapons marched towards the gates of Good Kodrer. An oppressive aura enveloped the whole of the city as bloodlust exuded from the bodies of each of the orcs in the distance. Watching the spectacle from afar, a faint smile appeared on my lips. The plan was a success. After I had Angelica kill Zornaraf directly, everything went as I envisioned. The orcs traced everything to the demons due to Angelica's residual demonic energy lingering on the corpses of Zornaraf and the bodyguard. Prior to killing Zornaraf, I had specifically asked Angelica to do that so that the orcs wouldn't question who killed Zornaraf. Moreover, with the fact that Zornaraf was killed at the same time that the food supplies were destroyed, the orcs came to the conclusion that the demons were responsible for the incident despite the fact that there was no evidence to support that conclusion. Everything was perfect. Well, almost everything. If I had to be honest, these past few days have been quite scary. Naturally, because of the incident, the orc chief was beyond enraged. The aura he exuded the past few days was something beyond frightening, as every time I glanced towards the tower in the middle of Good Kodrer it felt as though I was staring at death itself. And because of this, Kevin and I had no choice but to lay low for that period of time. Every day felt as though there was barely any oxygen in the air. Suffocating. Staring at the army of orcs from afar, Kevin, who's standing next to me, glanced towards my arm which was currently bandaged, and asked, "Is your arm really okay?" Ever since Ren had come back from his mission, Kevin noticed the state of his arm. Although he wasn't particularly concerned as arms could be regrown with modern potions, Kevin was concerned that it might affect their future plans as he was now injured. Glancing at Kevin, I shook my head. Honestly, it hurts like hell. I wasn't lying. The pain I experienced right after Monarch's indifference deactivated almost caused me to pass out. It was mortifying. It was so painful that I couldn't even describe the feeling in words. What made matters worse was that even after 10 days had passed, I could still not move my arm properly. I think it may be due to something like the nerve endings of my arms not being fully connected, but I wasn't too sure. I wasn't an expert in this kind of stuff. Frowning slightly, Kevin curiously asked, "How long do you think it will take before you can use your arm like normal again?" Staring at my left arm for a couple of seconds, I mused. Maybe a couple of days? No, that was unrealistic. Unless I consumed an advanced potion, I wouldn't be able to have the same degree of control as before. Although my arm was in fact healing, every time I moved it, it felt as though electricity was coursing through it. The feeling was almost the same as when you accidentally hit your funny bone. Not very pleasant. Staring at my arm for a couple of more seconds, Kevin nodded his head. Turning his head around, Kevin proceeded to look towards the orcs in the distance. "What do you think the chances of the orcs winning are?" Without hesitation, I responded. "Slim to none, honestly." Sharing a similar thought, Kevin nodded his head. "I think so too. Although the orcs were strong and fierce, their chances of winning the fight weren't that high. Especially since their numbers were far lower than that of the demons. If they were going to have an all-out war against the demons, the chances of them winning were practically null. They may be able to reclaim some land, but that was the most they could accomplish, and that would be at the sacrifice of countless orcs." Thinking thus far, shaking his head and glancing at Ren next to him, Kevin asked, "So what's next?" Placing my hand on my chin as I fell into deep thought, I frowned. "Well, now that we've pretty much accomplished the hardest part of the plan, all that we have to do next is reap our rewards." Well, still not quite there, but almost there. Although this was indeed the hardest part of the mission, infiltrating S29 was going to pose quite a challenge. Even though most of the demon forces would be sent out to face the orcs, they would still leave behind some of the stronger demons. The reason I was saying it was easier than what I had just done was because there was a high chance that the strongest demons residing in S29 were not going to be there. With the orc chief Omagulg leading the battle, the leader of the demons in charge of S29 would have no choice but to move out as well. Otherwise, they were bound to lose as he was the only demon nearby that could fight on equal terms with Omagulg. Hearing the word rewards being mentioned, Kevin looked at me with a look of surprise. "Rewards? MHM. Seeing the surprise in Kevin's face, whilst still staring at the army of orcs in the distance, I proceeded to add, "Mindbreaker curse cure of course, and a couple of other things." "Don't worry, there are things for you too." Taken aback, Kevin pointed towards himself. "Me?"
Yeah.
Seeing me confirm, frowning, Kevin said, "But I've already gotten my 5-star sword manual, it wouldn't be an even deal if I took something." He had already gotten a 5-star sword art, if he took rewards wouldn't that mean that their deal was unfair? Although Kevin trusted Rin, he was apprehensive at the thought of owing someone as it could lead to complicated situations arising in the future. Glancing at Kevin from the corner of my eyes, understanding his thoughts, I shook my head. "Well, if you're not going to take it then suit yourself, I'll just leave it there since it has no use for me." "No use for you?" "Yup, that's why I thought you could use it. You don't have to owe me anything if you take it." It was true. The item I was giving Kevin was something that I couldn't use, so there was no point in me keeping it. Just take it as me giving a friend a gift. Taken aback, Kevin asked, "We're friends?" Smiling at Kevin, a chuckle escaped from my lips. Well, we've pretty much been through life and death situations, it wouldn't be strange to call ourselves friends, or is it just me? I wasn't lying when I said this. Having spent a lot of time with Kevin and going through a lot of life and death situations, I pretty much considered him a friend. Staring at me deeply, Kevin proceeded to nod his head. No, you're right. He also felt the same way as Ren, but he never really dwelled too deeply into it as he thought perhaps it was just him and Ren only thought of him as someone with who he had made a deal. Honestly, Kevin was secretly glad Ren felt the same way as him, as despite his popularity had never had a proper friend in the academy. He was quite happy. Unaware of Kevin's thoughts, smiling as I glanced at him on my right, I teased. So you're going to take the reward or not? Smiling bitterly, Kevin shook his head. I'll take it. Good. To be honest, the item was supposed to belong to him anyway, so it was only natural that he got it. After all, the stronger he got, the happier I was. He was the one with the highest chance of defeating the Demon King after all. Although I acknowledged the fact that if I continued this way there was a chance for me to be able to be on par with the Demon King, with Kevin as reassurance I wouldn't have to worry too much. That was as long as we had enough time to grow. But if there was one thing I learned from being in this world for the past 7 months, it was that life was a bitch. When you expect something to happen, the world would suddenly flip its middle finger at you and present you with a scenario outside of your prediction, catching you off guard. Therefore, I stopped expecting. If the world will throw something that does not match what I envisioned, I'll just get strong enough so that I could retaliate in kind. I was no longer planning on being passive like before. Staring at the army that had started moving out of the city, recalling something as I glanced at Kevin who was standing next to me similarly looking at the army in the distance, I said. Wait here, I've still got something to do, I'll be back shortly. Taken aback, Kevin asked. What? Where are you going? They are about to leave? Glancing at the army below us, I rolled my eyes. So? It's not like they are running? We were talking about an army of thousands upon thousands of orcs, each wearing large bulky metallic armor. They weren't going to be the hardest people to follow. Although yes, their strong bodies allowed them to move fast despite the fact that they were large armors, it still took time for them to go out, so we still had half a day. Realizing this, Kevin scratched his head in embarrassment as he said. I guess you're right. How long will it take? About an hour? Maybe less, who knows? All right, I'll wait for you. Cool.
See ya.
Soon. Moving out of the area we were in, I stared towards the distance as a faint smile appeared on my lips and thought to myself. Hopefully, what I'm about to do next plays out nicely. Inside of a dark confined location, kneeling on the ground was a figure whose hands and legs were bound by thick metal chains that connected all the way towards the ceiling. The figure had its eyes closed, and if not for the faint movement of his chest, someone would have easily mistaken him for dead. In the dark world, silence prevailed the surroundings. Suddenly, the silence was disrupted as a hooded figure calmly walked in and stopped right before the figure that was kneeling. Staring at the figure kneeling down on the ground, the hooded figure whose features were obscure called out. Silig. KHRR. A minute after his name was called out by the hooded figure, slowly raising his head, the features of the figure kneeling on the ground became more apparent, revealing a white orc with a massive scar tracing over half of his face. His deeply sunken green eyes were rather hazy as a result of the isolated confinement, however, the boundless bloodlust hidden within them could not be masked. Staring at the hooded figure before him, Silig's deep yet groggy voice resounded across the space. Who are you? Who am I? Raising his head, the hooded figure slowly said. Someone who can help you. Help me? Nodding his head, the hooded figure slowly said. Yes, I can grant you freedom. Freedom? Taking a couple of seconds to understand what the hooded figure was talking about, after a couple of seconds, lowering his head, Silic responded. No, I do not wish for freedom. Unbothered by the denial, the hooded figure once again spoke. Revenge, I can grant you revenge. Raising his head once more, Silic weakly asked. Revenge? Nodding his head, the hooded figure once again said. Yes, I can grant you revenge. Grant me revenge? Yes, I can help you get revenge on Omagolg, the orc chief. Hearing the name Omagolg being mentioned, as if some life returned in his eyes, Silic asked. Is what you said true? MHM. Weakly clenching his fists, Silic deeply stared at the hooded figure before him. What do you want in exchange? What do I want? Smiling behind the hood, the figure slowly spoke. In exchange, I want your loyalty. No, that doesn't sound right. Raising his head, the features of the hooded figure became more discernible, revealing a pale youth with deep blue eyes. A human? Staring at Sigil, who was looking back at him with a trace of shock in his eyes, the youth extended his hand forward and slowly clenched it. All you need to do is be my peace.